Awesome. Are you guys excited? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. We are so honored to have tonight's speaker here with us again. He's not only a Silicon Valley investor and technology entrepreneur, but he's also the founder of Bulletproof Coffee, the host of the #1 health podcast, Bulletproof Radio, which is incredible, as I'm sure you all know, as well as the author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Bulletproof Diet, and now Headstrong. He's spent over 2 decades and $1 million hacking his own biology. So without further ado, the man who really needs no introduction, Dave Asprey.
You guys may not know this, but Health Essentials was the first place in all of Canada to carry Bulletproof products. That's how cool this place is. And I consider myself pretty lucky to live in a place where we can get good quality food like this, because it's hard to curate natural foods and just really high quality stuff. So it's not everywhere, even in towns the size of Victoria, where you can go and just get so much really good stuff. The purity of sourcing of grass-fed beef, and some of the first people in Canada to get grass-fed butter reliably and things like that. That just comes from caring a lot, and that's something that you could say, well, it's because they're just a bunch of hippies. I mean, look at Tyler with that beard. What's wrong? Just kidding, Tyler. But it's actually because they care a lot, and that makes the world a better place, because when you get good quality food, it only comes from good quality soil. That means you have to have good quality soil, which means you do everything else right. And when you choose to buy stuff like that, it affects the environment around you really, really specifically, which is pretty important. And of course it affects the local environment, and it affects supply and demand. And then when you demand things like that, not only are you going to feel better and perform better, but the people who make stuff have to listen. And we've seen some huge changes south of the border, where like the big monolithic companies like Campbell's Soup and companies like that are saying, wow, like no one will buy our stuff. Our sales are down 25% year over year. Like, ouch, like we're a big brand. If we just tell people our stuff is good, wouldn't it be nice? 2 days ago, the American Heart Association just did like a PR piece promoting that you should eat margarine and vegetable oil instead of coconut oil, right? And like the internet just had this amazing response, which was just a middle finger. But just like, you guys are so stuck in the 70s. And it turns out, actually, they were stuck in the 70s, because the American Heart Association, which is echoed by the Canadian Heart Association, I think they call themselves that, and all the other like global statin drug marketing companies / government entities, they are all copying this stuff, and it was done on 4 studies, all from the 1960s and early 1970s. All data since then was rejected because it didn't agree with the hypothesis, including the largest, most expensive clinical trials ever conducted on nutrition. And then, and this is what just slays me, last year, a group of researchers said, let's go back and look at the data from one of those 4 studies in 1968 to 1973 in Wisconsin. They went in and they said, let's look at all the notes. And they found a bunch of data that had never been included in the original study. And when they included all the data, they found something really disturbing. For every 30 points you drop your cholesterol, there's a 22% increase in all-cause mortality. Oops. So what does the American Heart Association do? Put out another press release that says the same old crap they've been saying that's raised heart disease rates over the last 30 years. And it's just entirely unacceptable. And the cool thing is, people like us are just completely not fooled anymore. And this has never happened in all of history. You could always defeat people with just a big PR campaign because people can buy billboards. But now we have social media, we have meetings like this, we have the availability of publishing where you can write books. I mean, look at me. I'm an unlicensed biohacker. Like, you can't take away my license, but officially I have no credentials other than that I've spent 20 years running an anti-aging research group, lost 100 pounds, and like done all sorts of stuff you're not supposed to be able to do. But I've keynoted at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. That wouldn't have happened without like the internet, without social media, and just the ability to go out and seek stuff that works, and more importantly, to find other people who are doing something like you, and other people who are failed by a system that says, oh, this works, and like you try it. Wow, I spent a lot of money and time trying that, and all I got was tired and fat. Like maybe there's a better way. And in my own story, it starts out when I was 14 years old. I had arthritis in my knees. I had nosebleeds like 10 times a day, and weird autoimmune issues that we didn't know were autoimmunity. I was tired all the time. I was puffy. I had behavioral disorders. I had basically the equivalent of Asperger's syndrome. They didn't have a name for it back then, but oppositional defiant disorder, OCD, and ADD, and all those sorts of things. I really didn't know anyone's name in my classes, didn't make eye contact with anyone, but I was pretty good at smacking people at the in the schoolyard, but only if they smacked me first, because hey, that's what an Asperger. So come on, just hit me, good, bam. And well, I'm just kind of a different person today, and it's because over the time since then, I got really serious after I had a couple knee surgeries. I had 300 pounds when I was studying at university, and after the second knee surgery, it was so painful. They put a screw in and they moved some stuff over so my knee wouldn't just fold sideways when I was walking. And after 18 months of really intense effort, hour and a half of exercise a day, 6 days a week, half cardio, half weights, I could max out every weight in the gym. And I was eating a low-fat, low-carb diet full of inflammatory foods, a little bit of squeezed margarine when I needed it because it's better than butter, you know, that kind of stuff. And lots of gluten because, you know, it's low-fat. What happened was I finally said, all right, I'm going to do something risky for my knee. I'm going to go play laser tag. Okay, it wasn't not even paintball. Laser tag, like the world's geekiest, dorkiest, like it's slightly more dangerous than playing pool, right? And I go and I squat and I twist and I blow my knee out. And I'm just like, oh my God, like no matter how much I try, no matter how hard I push, I'm not losing the weight. I still weigh 300 pounds. I can bench press my thin friends while they eat cheeseburgers. And I'm at Carl's Jr. eating a salad with no dressing. And I'm watching my friends who weigh half what I weigh and don't exercise eat onion rings and cheeseburgers. I'm like, wait a minute, like maybe it's not me. And it was that I'm going to do what works instead of what doesn't work that really inspired me to start paying attention to this. A couple years later, I went to work in Silicon Valley, the company that held Google's very first servers. I was a co-founder of a part of that company. I made $6 million when I was 26 years old, which is actually really fun. And then, 2 years later, I lost it all, which actually turns out wasn't very fun. On the WHO list of stressors, losing wealth like that is equal to like losing a family member or relocating or like a very big change in life. So I had career stress, life stress, losing money stress, and lots of stress. And I became aware of the role of stress on things. Started taking smart drugs because I was getting severe brain fog, bought disability insurance because I'm like, I wouldn't hire myself. I don't know what's going on. But I really got into the cognitive enhancement side of things. Pretty soon, I started meeting the only people I could find in Silicon Valley who knew what they were talking about. And they were all 2 to 3 and sometimes 4 times my age. They ran an anti-aging nonprofit group that's called the Silicon Valley Health Institute. Within 2 years, they're like, could you be president? And one of my board members, his name was Mike. He was 88 years old at the time. And he was dating a 35-year-old stripper. I'm not joking. And it wasn't because he was paying her. It was because they actually had a healthy relationship. Odd, but healthy. But the fact of the matter is these guys and women were performing and in ways they were doing things that were amazing. And I was the only guy under 40 in the room. They met 4 minutes from Google's headquarters. When I took over, I found out that no one would come to these meetings. And for 10 years, I ran this nonprofit. How do we make it bigger? How do we get more people to learn this precious knowledge? Every month, someone who's studied a lifetime of aging and metabolism and nutrition and exercise, they come in and they give a lecture for free or for $5, whatever we charge at the time. And no one would come. And the reason was that it was all about being old. And I'll tell you, anyone want to guess who cares about anti-aging the most?
Old people.
Old people. Funny, right? And who cares about health the most? I guess. Sick people, right? So what was going on is we were targeting old people, but guess who has the most leverage over how old you're going to be?
Yeah.
Your mom, before you're conceived, and to some extent your grandmother. And what happens in the womb programs your genes, very specifically, not just the nuclear genes. These are the parts of you that are well known from the Human Genome Project. They define the hardware. If you think of yourself like a building, these define the physical structures. Where's there a wall? What's the roof look like? Things like that. And another set of genes come in. These are the mitochondrial genes, the ones we're just starting to really understand and to look at. Your mitochondrial genes are like the wiring diagram. So you can have two houses that look relatively the same, but one of them is set up to be a normal house, and the one next to it is set up to be a grow house full of electrical wiring and plumbing that's totally not normal, but maybe it was a higher power because they had to get all the electricity for the lights to grow the pot illegally. The point of the matter is that you have these two buildings that look approximately the same, but they're wired entirely differently. And one could be a factory, one could be a restaurant. Well, the wiring diagram for your body is controlled by your mitochondrial DNA, and that controls how your body makes energy. My latest book, Headstrong, is all about mitochondria. In fact, the reason it's called Headstrong is that you have the most of these little power plants called mitochondria inside your head, in your eyes and in your heart, a lot more than you do in the rest of your body. And some really profound things came about from writing the book. One of the things was it hit the science book bestseller list on the New York Times, which is highly unusual for what's typically considered an advice or a health book. They don't usually cross over, but I found it there on the list between Homo Deus and Sapiens, and with the Undamaged project and all these like really big books. I was really not expecting that, and honored by that and surprised, but it's because of the science behind what's going on in these little mitochondria. The reason this matters so much is if you think about what you may have learned in 7th grade biology, if you bothered to remember it, which frankly I probably didn't at the time, is that about 2 billion years ago, we had these ancient bacteria floating around, and we, not knowing who we were, since no one's figured that out yet, but we're probably some sort of parasitic organism, and maybe one similar to what causes Lyme disease. That's one of the theories. Anyway, another one is a brain-eating amoeba. I've actually been infected by that one. I'm like, is that grandma? Anyway. So we're some kind of an organism, and we harnessed these mitochondria, little rod-shaped bacteria, to become our power plants. And ever since then, they've become part of every animal out there. It's a nice story, except the real story goes like this. There's these little red bacteria floating around, and they saw some other bacteria, and they're like, or some other organism, and they're like, you know what, if we move right in, that looks like a really good petri dish. And they moved in and they took over, and they've never stopped being in charge of us, even to this very day. If you think about this, inside each of your brain cells, there's 15,000 ancient red bacteria sitting there doing stuff. Inside the rest of the cells in your body, other than your red blood cells and a few others, there's a couple hundred to a couple thousand of these little things. There's a quadrillion of them in your body, way more than there are cells in your body, way more than there are bacteria in your gut even. Oh, and they can talk to the bacteria in your gut because they're bacteria too. Over time, these little bacteria decided, you know, we've got all this DNA stuff we do that isn't that necessary. Let's give some of it to the mothership cell, but let's keep a lot of our own. And today, those quadrillion cells make up 10% of your body weight, and they're the logical equivalent, basically, of the battery in your iPhone, or your Android phone if you're like over 40 or something. Just kidding. It turns out older people use iPhones, younger people use Androids. I just like to make fun of whatever I don't have because it's fun. Now, if you think of what happens the first day you get your phone, you use it all day long, and by the end of the day, like, this is amazing. My phone still works. It still has a charge. I'm going to charge it, but it's good. And then after you've had it for 6 months, you've charged it, uncharged it, charged it, uncharged it. Pretty soon, your phone, it's dead by 3 p.m. And if you look at kind of what you might have going on, you might also be dead by 3 p.m. or at least want a nap and some sort of sugar fix. It's a similar process because we rely on these quadrillion ancient bacteria to turn oxygen, food, and sunlight into energy. And if that process is inefficient or broken or doesn't work very well, then you are inefficient and you don't work very well. It's particularly scary because, like I said, your brain has the most of these things. If you're not getting enough energy, the parts of you that rely on the most energy are going to feel it first. And because the body likes to not die, it's amazing how that is, it's going to selectively take the parts of the brain that are least important for survival, and it'll cut energy off to those first. Because these mitochondria are very motivated to keep the petri dish that is you alive. So that means that the part of you that's responsible for emotional regulation is going to go down first. So when that 3 p.m. thing comes, and then your boss walks into the room and says something that normally wouldn't be that offensive, but the time you're like, screw you, buddy, or you yell at your kids or your spouse, or you flip the guy off in traffic, or you do whatever you do when you're not at your best self, your mitochondria are a part of that equation. And it gets even a little bit more mysterious than that, because if you are a bacteria, there's really only 4 things you need to do. And this is not something that's in Headstrong, the book. It's something I realized after doing all the research, after I'd sent the book to the publisher. I'm like, wait, this finally explains so many things I couldn't explain before. If you're a bacteria and you want to live, you run away from, hide, or kill scary things. It's one of the most important things you can do. The next thing you do is you eat everything that might possibly be food. That's starving as a bacteria is apparently inappropriate. And the reason you eat everything that you possibly can eat is the other thing that you do, which is make sure you reproduce. So if you do those things, you have a successful bacteria. Now, you guys probably might have noticed, but is there anything you do or you've ever done that you're ashamed of that wasn't one of those 3 behaviors? You avoid work you didn't want to do for some bizarre reason because you're procrastinating because at some level you thought it might be threatening or annoying, you didn't want to do it. You went on that date you shouldn't have gone on, ended up in dating for 2 years, and you had the cheesecake when you said you weren't going to have the cheesecake. All these things happen. The good news is, it wasn't you, it was the mitochondria, so you're off the hook. Well, here's what's going on. In the late 90s, a very odd person named Stephen Wolfram, who made a program called Math Lab. And if you're in the statistics field or a super math geek, you recognize the software right away because it's what we use to do like math simulations and have for many years in universities. He locked himself in a closet for 2 years and used his own software and came out at the end with a book this thick called A New Kind of Math That No One Can Read. I know I tried to, like this is way over my head, but I got the gist of the first few chapters before it turned into equations that I totally couldn't do. I'm not that big of a math geek. But what he discovered was that if you take very simple rules, and you repeat them almost infinite numbers of times, complex patterns emerge. So he found that he could replicate many of the things, the most wonderful things in nature that we see that look like, wow, who would have designed that? It's like, well, you just take these 3 rules and you do them like a kabillion times 10 times, and magically you get a shell. Magically you get a plant. And it's groundbreaking work. And what we have going on in our bodies today is a quadrillion bacteria making those 3 decisions millions of times a second to make sure that the petri dish that is you is alive. And the way you feel, the emotions that come up are a result of their interaction with the environment around you. Because guess what? We like to think that we observe the world around us. In fact, if you are into like meditation and The Secret, like the observer effect, if you concentrate on something long enough, you can make it happen. Bad news. It doesn't work. Because our conscious thinking is about 300 milliseconds. And their awareness of the environment is sub 10 milliseconds. So you have a quadrillion bacteria inside of you that are sensitive to light, they're sensitive to sound, pressure, gravity, temperature. Actually, they're very light sensitive, it turns out. They're sensitive to every spectrum of the electromagnetic and light frequency that's out there, including your Wi-Fi antenna, including your cell phone, including all that stuff. So they're constantly monitoring the world around you, doing everything possible to keep you alive. And if you're feeling a little bit skeptical about that, you remember sometime in your life where you've leaned on a hot stove or a hot something, and you pull your hand away and say, wow, good thing I pulled my hand away, the thing was hot. Sorry, you're a liar. You didn't pull your hand away. Something pulled your hand away, and then you're like, wow, that was really hot, I'm feeling it now. What pulled the hand? That was a distributed network of a quadrillion mitochondria saying, run away from scary things. That would include hot stoves that might kill our petri dish, right? And if you recognize that there's this distributed network in the body that's doing that, like, okay, that matters, but what can I do about it? Number 1, 48% of people under age 40 have early onset mitochondrial dysfunction. That basically means that the quadrillion bacteria that work together to keep you alive, that something's wrong. They're not getting what they need, or there's a genetic problem, there's something happening, they don't make enough energy. They don't store enough energy. They can't deliver the energy that you need. And there's all sorts of metabolic effects. In fact, every single degenerative disease known to man directly comes from mitochondria. Alzheimer's, cancer, Parkinson's, all of these things. When you strip down the layers, it comes down to the cells aren't making enough energy, they got inflamed. Inflammation is always caused by mitochondria. And when you realize that, you're like, wait a minute, okay, these are the most important thing going on. In fact, at least half of our behaviors, maybe more than half of our behaviors, are driven directly by the system that's there to keep the petri dish alive. They don't even care about what you want. What they care about is what they think will keep the body alive, and what they think will keep the body alive is those three things. Except I forgot. How many of you have ever seen how kombucha is made? Or yogurt, SCOBY? It turns out that bacteria will, when they have enough fuel, when they're in an environment that's not too threatening, they will form a community. They actually make friends with each other. They form biofilms. They'll specialize and say, all right, you make the outer layer of our SCOBY. You make a channel that uses nutrients. Here's a channel that gets rid of waste products, which humans are dumb enough to drink. Just kidding, I had kombucha earlier. But the whole thing going on here is that somehow they specialize, and it's because bacteria can and do talk to each other, and it's one of the big problems in medicine today, because in hospitals, on implants, in IVs, we get these biofilms that form. Even in food production, biofilms are a substantial issue. You know, Capri Sun is well known, those little juice boxes, for having like mats of biofilms inside their stuff, which is gross. They're like, oh, it's because we're a natural product. I'm like, maybe you should tell us what's in the biofilm before you say it's good for me, just saying. But what that means, the implications for us, is that we're also wired to form communities and to specialize and to help each other. And we're wired to do that not at a conscious level, but at a subconscious, unconscious, automatic level. But that we'll only do that when we have enough energy. So if 48% of us under age 40 have early onset mitochondrial dysfunction, guess what percent of people over age 40 have mitochondrial dysfunction? Everybody. They just don't call it early onset. They just call it aging. Right? And I'm like, screw that noise. Like, I want to have late onset mitochondrial dysfunction, like after 180-year-old mitochondrial dysfunction. I'm willing to consider it then. So are there things we can do to control our mitochondria? Because they're controlling us. So this is the computer hacker in me going, there's something in here that's hacking my system, let me hack the hacker. Well, since they don't really listen to us, not very well anyway, and I'll tell you how your mitochondria will listen to you in a little bit, what you can do is you can change the environment around you, because that's what they're doing. They evolved 2 billion years ago, floating in the ocean, looking at light and temperature and all these things. That's what they care about. So if you can expose them to things that cause them to get stronger, cause them to work better, cause them to stop leaking electrons where they're inefficient, then what happens is you get more energy. And since these are the exact things that decide what genes get expressed, because mitochondria control epigenetics, which is the study of how your physical genes get changed in response to the environment. The environment is read by mitochondria and then written by your DNA. Wow, like that's profound. Well, okay, change that environment, they'll change your physical DNA. But more importantly, they'll change their function first. So they decide what genes get expressed. They also decide if you get cancer. They decide if you'll get Alzheimer's disease. They decide if a nerve can fire, a neuron can fire. They decide everything. They decide how much your blood sugar will be. They decide whether you're getting ready to run away or getting ready to repair the body. The whole fight or flight response is autonomic. It's part of the system that emerges out of those 4 basic rules that are run all of the time based on inputs that you probably don't even know about, because they're set very, very early in life, and some of them are just automatic. Even a very small child or a baby will pull away from a hot thing. That rule's built into us. There's a reason that fingernails on a blackboard make us do this. It's not us doing this, it's the damn mitochondria doing that without your knowledge or permission. Like, who do they think they are? Well, it turns out, if that was a tiger doing that, they're your friends. And if it was your teacher doing that, then they're not serving your needs. So part of what you do when you meditate, when you do things to make yourself calmer, you're actually getting control over the signal that your mitochondria are sending you. And when you get to the point where you're really in charge of your nervous system, like, oh look, I got a signal from the environment, and it was totally a stress signal, but it wasn't an inappropriate one. So now I know that's not me, so I might feel that, and I'll just turn that off. Or, even if I'm feeling it, I'll just feel it, but I know that I'm not going to die. Whereas most of us, if you get a feeling like you're going to die, you assume that that is you, and that it's real, and the feeling is real, but the threat isn't, and then you respond as if there's a threat, and that means you yell at your spouse, and you do all sorts of things that you wish you hadn't done, and it's because at the time, you thought you were going to die, and your mitochondria thought you were going to die, and that's what they did. One of the things that makes mitochondria think they're going to die is running out of energy. Remember those 3 things? Run away from scary stuff, eat everything, and make sure that you reproduce. So if you can't eat everything because there's nothing to eat and you don't have enough energy, that means you can't reproduce. That means the petri dish, our whole organization of multiple petri dishes, they're at threat. It's just a dumb little bacteria. You can see why they might be confused, right? Well, that's what we're dealing with. So the number one thing you might want to do is make sure that you have enough fuel for these guys. And my first book, The Bulletproof Diet, goes into great lengths about what you can do to reduce cravings and increase willpower. Guess where cravings and willpower come from? That eat everything thing, that's your mitochondria. Unless you're dealing with like an emotional thing, there are emotional eating disorders that are tied at much higher levels in your brain, but quite often the physical cravings, those are mitochondria saying we are going to die. We being the mitochondria and we feeling like you if we don't eat that. And guess where willpower comes from? Willpower comes from electrons. It's a thought. Guess where electrons come from? Those same damn little mitochondria. So you play this neat little game. The mitochondria are like, we're starving because you have hypoglycemia, and then someone sets a plate of muffins in front of you. And you go, nah, I'm a good person. I'm going to say no to the muffin, right? Willpower, electrons gone. And the mitochondria are like, did we mention we're starving? Have some fear and anxiety. Not like high level, just low level. And then a voice comes in your head. Eat the muffin. And then you, no. Another bit of electrons gone. And you do this over and over. And pretty soon, you've used up enough energy. The mitochondria are like, you know, sorry about that, but your prefrontal cortex is out of energy. How's that willpower for you right now? And then you eat half of a muffin, and then you tell yourself you're a bad person. And from now on, you can just say, bad mitochondria, bad! And you don't, this is actually what's going on. And it's not that visible, but the research in Headstrong made this abundantly clear to me. And this also explains the weird woo-woo stuff. How many of you have ever been to like a Qigong master or a Reiki master, or someone who does energy healing work? Some of you are willing to raise your hands. Okay, now we can all point at you and laugh. Just kidding, me too. The guy who wrote the mitochondrial meditation in Headstrong is my friend Barry Morgan. This guy's a UCLA surgeon, endoscopic surgeon for 30 years, like 40,000 patients, and one of the best surgical records on record in terms of success. And he's doing not the easy patients, but the hard patients. He's also able to do that because in the course of becoming a very well-respected university lecturer and surgeon, he went around the world and asked traditional healers, what do you do? Because I want the people who heal with 2 fingers from across the room. I want to know how that works. And eventually got to China in the late 70s and started working with acupuncture and working with herbalists, and got to a monastery high in the mountains where they literally wouldn't open the door for a few days to let him in and treated him kind of like a dog. If you've seen Doctor Strange, the movie, that was actually based on an interview with Dr. Barry. It's spiced up a little bit, obviously. But over the course of time, he became one of 12 living grandmasters of a Chinese energy medicine tradition that's used to protect the emperors of China. This is the root of the Shaolin tradition and a lot of shamanic traditions. It's been in continuous flow for 5,000 years. This energy medicine stuff works. He treats presidents of countries. When you see Tony Robbins go on stage, guess who's backstage, like charging Tony Robbins up? Okay, Tony's on fire without Barry. I've seen him without Barry. This year, I'm actually one of the speakers on Tony's main stage for Unleash the Power Within, which is completely unexpected and awesome. And that said, everyone on his staff knows Dr. Barry. And he's done energy work on me that makes no sense. So if you believe whatever you believe, like, oh, that hocus pocus woo-woo stuff, like, here's the deal. Your mitochondria, they make electromagnetic fields. They are sensitive to electromagnetic fields. They make photons. They're called biophotons, and they're exquisitely sensitive to photons. So if you're telling me that I can't affect you from here, I can prove to you via known measurable mechanisms that I can affect you and you can affect me. And that's because our hearts are the largest electromagnetic fields in our body. It's like a magnetic field. When I say it's large, it's not a woo-woo thing. It's shaped like a donut. It's tipped 8 degrees to the left. We can measure it this far out of the body, and we know that magnetic fields continue on infinitely. They just drop at the cube of distance. So what's going on right now is that whatever my heart's doing, your heart is measuring. This is also a magnetic detector. We know that if a human walks into a stall with a horse, if the horse is trained to interact with humans, the horse's heart rate variability, the spacing between its heartbeats, will change to match the human before the human touches the horse. We're sending magic fairy waves out of our foreheads, obviously, right? Leprechauns, like the whole thing. Aliens, no. This is actually science. And what ties this together is mitochondria, because these are the only organs in the body that create and can measure and sense those kinds of fields. So this ties together things like meditation, things like calmness, these relatively random but measurable but hard to explain phenomena, and they tie together what happens on your plate. They tie together type 2 diabetes, they tie together cancer, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, arthritis, autoimmunity, thyroid dysfunction. Every one of the things you can name are all tied to these ancient bacteria. So we have to hack it for them. How many of you have ever had a compost pile? Wow, I knew in this room there'd be a lot of hands. So here's what happens in a compost pile. I run a small organic farm a little bit up the island, and if you put the wrong stuff in a compost pile, it's gross. It gets all slimy, you don't get happy worms, you get flies and maggots and rats and raccoons, and it's just not a good scene. And if you do it right, you get really, really healthy soil. And by now most of us know that you gotta eat some fiber, eat some vegetables, take some probiotics, and if you do that, you're going to get this bacteria mix in your gut. You take care of its environment, and then it'll make the right stuff. Guess what? You are no different. You have a quadrillion bacteria, and the habitat that they live in, your petri dish, has to be set up right so that they can do what they're supposed to do. And one of the things that these mitochondria are capable of doing as bacteria is basically functioning as a standalone bacteria and doing what a standalone bacteria does. But they're part of a very complex network of these things. And to set up a complex network of things like that, and I know this from my time in Silicon Valley, like building big internet infrastructure, one of the things you have to do is you have to let the pieces of infrastructure talk to each other. So how do mitochondria talk to each other? It turns out we can take equations straight out of Silicon Valley networking and look at, is it feasible that mitochondria use these light signals that we know they generate the same way LED lights generate photons, and the ones that they can read, is it possible that they use these to talk to each other? And it turns out, yes, that's the most likely way that we believe mitochondria set up this incredible network throughout the body, except they have to have almost total darkness for this to work. What that means is that if you're sleeping with an LED light in your room, if you have curtains that are allowing street lights in, and you're not sleeping in an area where you can't see your hand, this complex network that's supposed to do the battery refresh cycle that your phone does when you're charging it, they can't do that. A study just came out the other day. I posted it to my Facebook page, and they showed that high triglycerides, which are supposed to be caused by coconut oil, if you believe the wackos of the American Heart Association, that they're actually caused, not just by, but they are caused in many cases by, or in part by, what's called circadian disruption. In other words, if your timing signal for all these mitochondria that tells them all, hey, it's nighttime, time for all of you to rest and recover and fold your proteins and make hormones and do the things you do, versus, hey, it's daytime, get ready to run around and like kill a tiger and eat it, or find some roots and tubers, or do whatever your petri dish is supposed to do. Well, if some of them are confused by this, or they can't communicate with each other, high triglycerides are a result. So circadian disruption, it turns out you can predict whether someone sleeps well just by their triglyceride status. It's one of the strongest predictors they could find. Or you could believe the American Heart Association.
How do they establish cause and effect there? It seems like it could work the other way.
That the high triglycerides cause you to sleep poorly?
Yeah.
There is no evidence that high triglycerides cause people to sleep poorly, and we know people with low triglycerides sleep poorly sometimes. But how do you cause and effect? I can hypothetically, given what I know without looking up papers, I can tell you that when you have circadian disruption, mitochondrial function goes down. When mitochondria are incapable of pulling either fat or sugar out of the blood sugar levels or triglycerides will rise. So basically, high triglycerides are a hallmark of mitochondrial dysfunction, and mitochondrial dysfunction is what happens when you don't get enough sleep. We also know, for instance, that one night of bad sleep equals 40% less ability to regulate your blood sugar the next day. That's amazing. And that's because when you're sleeping, your mitochondria go into this rest and repair cycle that they require. So if they don't know it's nighttime, or if some of them think it is and some of them don't, or they all think it's nighttime, but they can't talk to each other because you have a light on in your room, even a very small amount of light of the wrong color can completely screw up your sleep. This is a major contributor to some of the metabolic diseases we see today. And through Headstrong, I have recommendations for what to do to control light exposure. And there's some cool stuff you can do. There's various pieces of technology. One of the most amazing pieces of technology out there is called curtains. You can get a curtain upgrade. I can tell you, we had some drapes people come out to our bedroom, and I'm like, I want blackout curtains. Like, oh, that's great. I'm like, look, I didn't say I want to blackout fabric. I'm like, I want to blackout curtains. That means if I can see any light, it will be a failure. And I use the F word, fail. Like, her eyes got really big. She's like, you want no light around your curtains? I'm like, funny, yeah. Like, do you know where we live? Like, it's like till midnight. And so she came up with a system, and it worked. But it's actually hard to do that. And in our guest bedroom, we have another system for blacking the room out. It's called aluminum foil. It's pretty ghetto. But you got to do what you got to do if you're going to get a good night's sleep. When I go to a hotel room, I used to use black electrical tape. And now I started another company called Biohacker that makes these little dots that you can put on top of LEDs that still let you get a little bit of the light through so you can see it, but it filters out the harmful frequencies. And now when I travel, like I'm flying tonight, which I'm going to stick to the clock tonight. Normally I'd stay late with you guys, but I'm flying to Seattle as soon as we're done here. These are called the True Dark glasses. You wear these during the day, they block out half of the blue light that you're exposed to indoors. Blue light, you need a little bit of it during the day, but if you get as much blue light as comes from fluorescent lights, or as comes from, in particular, LED lights during the day, it really stresses out your mitochondria, and by the end of the day, you end up with sugar cravings, and you're tired, and you go home and you're like, what's going on? But on weekends, even if you sleep the same amount, you eat the same things, you don't feel that way. It's your lighting environment that's a huge contributor to your energy metabolism. And then, before I go to bed, these come in a set with the real breakthrough glasses. Turns out, 5% of the cells in your eyes, they're called melanopsin sensors. They sense light, and they have more mitochondria than all the rest of the sensors in your eyes. So they look like little bodybuilder cells. And the light they receive, you can't see. It goes straight into something called the SCN, and that's the part of the brain that controls the timing signals for the whole body. And what that means is that if you wear blue blocker glasses all day, then you can't see any blue light and you mess up your timing. If you wear blue blocker glasses, just plain generic ones, which you can get for like $12 on Amazon, if you wear those in the evening, it'll improve your sleep quality because it allows your body to make melatonin. Even a few seconds of the LED light in your bathroom in the evening before you go to bed, or just looking at your screen without glasses on, is enough to turn off melatonin production for 4 hours. Melatonin is your sleep hormone. So like, wow, that's a bit of a problem. It turns out though, blue blockers don't block the frequencies of light that control the timing system inside the body. So there's a set of known frequencies, and now there's a set of optical filters that match those. And you wear the glasses. I probably have the ones I travel with. I wasn't planning to even talk about this, but I'm just talking about whatever seems cool. Whenever you guys nod, I'm like, you must like that.
Is that in your book?
Yeah, these are in the book. And, all right, check this out, quick Cyclops. Oh yeah. I'm in training to be a rock star. No. What these do is they block every frequency of light. So, like those little mitochondria, little bastards. Like, hey guys, guess what? It's midnight, and you can still read. Like you're totally tricking them. That's awesome. And I found that if I wear these for 2 hours before bed, I get twice the deep sleep than I normally get. And I monitor my deep sleep. I have 2 different apps. One of them is embedded in this ring that can monitor that. And I flew to Dubai and back in 4 days, no jet lag. Like completely eliminated the jet lag from me in a way that I was astounded when I funded the company.
So what do you call those particular ones? What?
These are called True Dark glasses.
True Dark glasses.
And it's the website is called biohacked, Hacked.
Can you get them in prescription?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a little plasticky thing that you can get lenses cut that mounts inside them. And I got to tell you, they aren't the sexiest looking glasses. Victoria's Secret rejected when we tried to send it to them. But I'll tell you, you might not wear them every night. You might not wear them on a date. Or if you and your partner wearing them, you're like, okay, we're totally going to date. But they do things that are incredible. And it's because you're tricking your mitochondria into believing, oh, I can start my rest and reset process ahead of time. And I can make my melatonin at the right time. So I have tons more energy when I do that. And I don't wear these outdoors ever, to the extent you can get natural sunlight in your eyes, especially as Canadians, like we need natural sunlight. And glasses, prescription glasses, block the ultraviolet light. Because guess what? Your mitochondria are ultraviolet sensitive, and if they don't get any ultraviolet light, they're not happy. Because guess where they evolved? Oh, in the ocean, under the sun. And that's why, yeah, excessive ultraviolet light isn't good for you. No ultraviolet light is even worse for you. Did you know that nearsightedness is correlated with low UV exposure? Getting a little bit of natural sunlight in your eyes makes you less likely to need glasses. Like, why don't they teach you that, right? So we have this weird thing we do as humans. I don't know why. I'd like to know why, actually. It's probably the mitochondria. I blame them for everything now. But if something is good or bad, let's do all of it or none of it. So ultraviolet, well, you get a sunburn, that's bad. Therefore, let's get none of it. There's new science out that shows that sun exposure is inversely correlated with melanoma. So we think the sun causes melanoma? Well, it turns out my grandfather died of melanoma on his big toe, because he was tanning his big toe a lot, right? No, he was walking through cotton fields full of pesticide and getting more down his feet than everywhere else. But turns out you need to have that stuff. See, science says 20 minutes. What does that mean?
It's actually 10.
10? Is this including Q&A, or is this just...
No, just a Q&A.
Right,
but whatever you want to do.
All right, good deal. So what I'm proposing here is that by controlling your light exposure, you can absolutely change how long you're going to live, how you look, and how you feel. That's just one of the things that's in Headstrong. Controlling what you put in your body is particularly important, because this is going to be amazing. If you're a plant, you have something kind of like a mitochondria. It's called a chloroplast. And guess what chloroplasts want to do? It's only 4 things. The same 4 things. Except for run away, it's pretty hard when you have roots. Like, it's a serious disadvantage. So the other 2 strategies are kill or hide. Right? So you can go underground, put your good stuff down where things won't dig it out unless they have shovels. And then kill, you just cover yourself in poison. That's what we call whole grains. It's grass telling you, don't eat my babies. Well, it turns out it's not just whole grains. It's a lot of plants have these defense mechanisms in them. And in Headstrong, I write about, hey, these plant defense systems directly inhibit mitochondrial function. Oh, and what else? What's the most ancient enemy of bacteria you can think of? Fungus. Wow. So 2 billion years ago, there was like a mold or a fungus, and there was a bacteria, and they're like, I'll kill you, and they never stopped. Well, since you are made out of bacteria, and we have these ancient enemies, we use things like penicillin. They're very effective in very small doses at killing certain kinds of bacteria. Most antibiotics inhibit mitochondrial function significantly. In other words, you took something to kill the bad bacteria, but it took a chunk out of you, at least out of the part of you that you think is you, that's your power plant. You made the battery in your phone 25% less able to keep a charge. You can still make phone calls all day, you're just going to have to eat a little bit more. But the batteries that are 25% less likely to keep a charge are more likely to get cancer and other metabolic diseases and blood sugar dysregulation. The vast majority of prescription drugs, but not all of them, are documented to be mitochondrial inhibitors. That's bad news for us. It means take the drugs when you need them. Drugs can save your life, but don't rely on them all the time. Other drugs like thyroid hormone, you don't have enough of that, it turns down all of your mitochondrial function, which is why having adequate thyroid function works really well. When you're looking at your food, if you're eating mold toxins, I didn't say mold specifically, or fungus specifically, but the toxins made by the fungus in its never-ending war against bacteria, some of those toxins are particularly nasty for you. There's about 200 species of known toxic mold that make super nasty toxins that kill people. The most cancer-causing toxin on Earth is a mold that comes from Aspergillus, or a mold toxin from Aspergillus called aflatoxin. We've all probably heard of this. It comes in peanuts. Turns out it can grow in your walls too. Aflatoxin causes cancer. Did I mention what causes cancer? Mitochondrial dysfunction. So aflatoxin poisons mitochondria. Mitochondria are like, I guess we'll turn this cell into cancer now because we can't make energy in the other way. Too bad. So I would advise, in Headstrong I do advise, avoid things that are full of mitochondrial inhibiting toxins. So certain foods, you want to cook them a certain way, or don't eat other foods that inhibit mitochondria. Don't expose yourself to water-damaged buildings. In Canada, especially this part of Canada, it is a serious issue. At least half the buildings around here have water damage. Things with flat roofs, things that have had a water leak. You look at the ceiling in here, there's no dark tiles with stains on them. Thank you, Tyler. I would have known, by the way, if there was mold in here. I grew up in a house with toxic mold in the basement. It's one of the reasons I had some of the problems I had. I was poisoning my mitochondria since I was 3 years old. When we bought our house, Violent, we tested it for mold. The crawl space was full of mold. One of the walls had to be taken off because behind the stucco was all black mold. We moved in there. We'd been okay. But different people respond differently because we all have this different mitochondrial DNA. And we can have someone sitting right here who's like, I feel great. Someone right here is like, I have chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, the person who feels great might get cancer, and the person who has chronic fatigue syndrome might also get cancer or just feel crappy all the time, or get diagnosed with Lyme disease, even though it's toxic mold that are causing the symptoms and things like this. But it all comes down to mitochondrial function. So again, this is setting up the environment around you that makes sure you have clean air without mold spores and mold toxins in it. It's terribly important if you want to function at the level you're capable of functioning at, and if you want to live a long time, and you don't want to spend the last 20 or 30 or 40 years of your life in a retirement home. Right? This is how important this is. And there's other things you can do with food, like eat undamaged fat. Here's why. We've all heard that we have cell membranes, and you might think of a membrane as like a piece of plastic wrap, except that's not what the membranes in our body are at all. They're tiny droplets of fat that repel water on both sides. So each of the cells in your body is basically a whole bunch of little droplets of fat enveloping some stuff. And in that stuff is a whole bunch of mitochondria. And each of the mitochondria has a mitochondrial membrane that's made out of fat, tiny droplets of fat. And inside that, there's more stuff. Well, if you eat damaged fats, if you eat the wrong kinds of fats, what happens? Well, you try to make mitochondria, you try to make cell membranes, and you make cells that don't function very well, that create free radicals, that create inflammation. And when that happens, you make less energy per unit of food you put in the body, and you get a muffin top. But you don't just get a muffin top, you get a muffin top in your brain, because you get inflammation in your brain. And that is why, if someone came to me and said, Dave, you have to do one of these two things. Eat a plate of French fries, or smoke a cigarette, I'd smoke a cigarette. I've never smoked a cigarette. I think it's disgusting. But I can tell you, nicotine's a performance-enhancing substance that's actually good for your mitochondria in small doses. And the damage to your vascular system that comes from burning that stuff and smoking a cigarette lasts for 4 hours. The damage from a plate of fried food, even if you fry it in a healthy oil, is still a 24-hour damage to the body. So I'm serious, don't eat French fries. It's just not worth it. Bake the damn things and pour butter on them when you're done. It tastes the same. It's not that hard. Seriously, it's just order of operations. Like, didn't they teach this in cooking school? No, they didn't. Right? That's the kind of stuff that's worth knowing. So undamaged fats are really important. When some bozo organization says, a high-fat diet will kill you, it's like, wait. That's like saying a high liquid diet will kill you. Well, if the liquid is vodka, that's probably true. If the liquid is water, it's probably not true. Although too much water can kill you too. It's called drowning. Or hyponatremia. When marathon runners drink so much water, they lose their electrolytes and then they die. So, okay, water can be a toxin as well. But what's going on in this whole discussion? Well, what's going on is getting the right dose and then treating your body so that it gets the things that it needs, doesn't get the things that it doesn't need. And we have a lot more control than you might think. There's other things you can do with temperature regulation. There's things you can do with going into ketosis. Ketosis is a mode where your mitochondria make energy from fat. This is going to be really, really weird, but which has more calories, carbohydrates or fat on a per gram basis? Right, it has more calories. What's the unit of measure for energy? Didn't we want more energy or less energy? Wait a minute, do you mean calories give us energy? Now, I run a food company. Shouldn't I be selling you the minimum possible calories that I can get you to give me the most dollars for because it's cheaper to make it and then tell you it's good for you? That's what's been going on for a long time. I'll tell you, if you want to like save a lot of money, turn the wrapper over and calculate the dollars per calorie in your food. That's kind of an important metric, except calories aren't that important if they're the wrong calories. So what you want to eat is food made of undamaged fat with moderate non-inflammatory proteins and lots of something called polyphenols. Polyphenols come from colored plant compounds. You get that combination of things right, your mitochondria work really, really well. If you eat almost no sugar and low protein, after 4 days your body can go into a state called ketosis where you burn fat for energy. Or if you go downstairs you'll find brain octane oil. It will put you in ketosis a half hour after you use it. Coconut oil doesn't work. Coconut oil does the same thing to your body as sleeping for 8 hours. It doesn't raise your ketones much at all. It's an 8-hour fast. And MCT oil, the generic stuff, doesn't work nearly as well for raising ketones in studies from the University of California at San Diego, but MCT oil does cause something called disaster pants. Because your body has a hard time absorbing it, because it doesn't work that well. So disaster pants can be fun for your friends, but not for you. So what I do is I keep a little bottle of generic MCT oil at home, and when people come over that I don't like, I'm like, let me make you some bulletproof coffee. And but now that I think about it, I should do that. So it's kind of funny that you can do something like that. When you get more ketones, there's amazing research around cancer. I've interviewed people, experts around the world around cancer and ketones. And almost every metabolic disease, in particular Alzheimer's disease, improves when you have more ketones present, which is pretty amazing. So the recommendations in Headstrong are, be in ketosis sometimes. You can use external sources of ketones, or you can fast, or you can go on a low-carb diet. And just do it sometimes, but not all the time. The other thing is going to really sound like I'm a bad person. It might be true. In the morning, after you take your shower, when you have the warm water hitting on the face right here, take a deep breath, or maybe 20, turn the knob all the way to cold. You'll last for about 8 seconds if you're a normal person. Before you're like, my head hurts, I'm going to die. It's okay to get out of the water then. Now, the thing that told you were going to die, those little lying bastards. It was the mitochondria. You know you're not going to die from 8 minutes of cold water. Sorry, 8 seconds of cold water. Are you kidding me? But they sure were loud when they yelled, weren't they? Okay, and you jump out of the water like, oh, that sucked. You're like, Dave's a jerk. Okay? And then the next day, do it again. And you'll be able to go for 20 seconds. And the next day, you're like, I did like 40 seconds. Now Dave's a jerk. You know how bad again. If you do this for 4 days, you'll be able to go for 30 seconds to a minute, and it won't feel painful at all. And what you did that first day is you told the mitochondria, guess what? If you can't make a lot of heat right now, die. Okay, that's what they heard anyway. And it's good. Only the strong survive.
Does it have to be on your face?
Yeah, it turns out there's a lot of nerves on your face and upper chest. The top of your head isn't so important, but right here and right here are the most important ones.
And what does that do? What's the benefit for that?
The benefit of that is that it causes the mitochondria to need to turn on their infrared, their ability to make heat really rapidly. And the ones who can't do it are like, I'm gonna die! And then they tell you that. But pretty soon, the rest of the mitochondria are like, you're not pulling your weight. Could you die? And that's what they do. That's what biofilms do. And then they replace them. It's called mitochondrial biogenesis. You actually grow new, stronger cells able to take that on. So if you're in stage 4 adrenal fatigue, maybe this is going to be too much for you. But for the vast majority of people, you do this as a regular practice. It feels amazing. It feels really good. But the first 4 days are so horrible. Even the first week isn't very comfortable. But after that, like, wow, I had no idea, but I do this and I kind of look forward to it. Right? And wow, who would have thought? All you're telling them, same thing, intermittent fasting. In Headstrong, I tell you how to do it in the Bulletproof diet as well, on the roadmap, which I think a lot of you have. It's how to do it for free. You can download that on bulletproof.com for free. And there, you have your dinner before it gets dark. Don't eat when it's dark. You wake up in the morning, instead of eating, have bulletproof coffee, which has 0 protein and 0 carbs, has brain octane in it, your ketone levels go up, and you don't have lunch until 2. It's called a bulletproof intermittent fast. Don't worry, you won't be hungry. Ketones turn off hunger like nothing else. I haven't had a food craving in so long. Like bulletproof coffee, you're like, wait, did someone just put the bagels in front of me? I didn't even think about it. I just don't want them. Versus before you're like, oh, thank goodness, I made it. Like the conversation in your head's different. And you do this, same thing, the mitochondria are like, I got no sugar. I'm gonna die. Except the ketones turn off the I'm gonna die signal, but the ones who don't have enough energy, they do die. And then they get replaced by stronger ones. So occasionally not eating is really good for you.
What about if you have an issue with caffeine? You're trying to drink bullet coffee.
If you have an issue with caffeine, then drink decaf bulletproof coffee.
Okay.
Here's why I recommend doing that. In studies of coffee, they show up to 5 cups of coffee a day, even decaf, is correlated with the longest life. In our diet, coffee has the most polyphenols of any other source that we get. And if you look like throughout history, the very first trading routes were around salt trading. Because by the way, you can eat as much salt as your body wants. We just found out from the Russian space program last year, we totally have no clue what's going on with sodium in our bodies, but a low salt diet does trigger cancer, and the amount of sodium you eat has very little to do with whether your blood pressure will change. But if you eat a high salt diet, you can have 25% more calories without getting fat. And it doesn't cause high blood pressure. Liberating, right?
For me, it is, isn't it?
And the calories can be cheesecake as long as it's not made with sugar and bad stuff. There are recipes. So what's going on with this is that you want to have these polyphenols. So first we started with salt routes, and a lot of the borders in Asia are actually like the mountains where the original salt traders traded. And as soon as they were done with that, they started trading tea and spices. Now I asked my 7th grade teacher, why did they trade spices? Like people froze to death on mountains to trade spices. Why were they so valuable? And the teacher, in all of her wisdom, said, it's because they didn't have refrigerators, so the meat would spoil and it would taste bad, so they needed spices. I'm like, okay. What? No, that's not right. Here's why. Because your mitochondria cannot function without polyphenols. Polyphenols are photon signaling molecules. They're critically important for our system, and you've got to get your polyphenols. And coffee is a way to get it. And I recommend you do some green tea. And I make a new supplement called Polyphenomenal. But the richest sources of polyphenols on a per gram basis are coffee, tea, chocolate, and spices. So what I do now is I put a lot more rosemary from the garden and oregano and fennel seed, all of the spices, turmeric, all those things, load up on those. Put them in your smoothies, crust everything you eat with them, and just get used to having a more robust flavor in your food because your mitochondria deserve it. And that's why spices are so important. That's why they have a lot of their biological effects, because they directly affect mitochondrial production and signaling.
And these have to be fresh herbs and fresh
They don't have
spices?
to be fresh, but if they're old and they're powdered, or you store them above your fridge, or sorry, above your stove, or you open them over a boiling pot and sprinkle them in. We live in a wet climate anyway. You know what grows on the spices? The nastiest mold ever. Because if you're a mold, spices have all sorts of anti-mold defense systems. If you can grow in there, you're a bad mold. So it turns out mold in spices is particularly noxious. So you want to keep them in sealed glass jars, not those little cans. You want to keep them far away from sources of light and particularly moisture and heat. If you do that, you should be in good shape. All right, that's 5 minutes to talk, or 5 minutes for Q&A? Both? What?
Up to you.
Up to me? Should we do some Q&A? See, it's 7:36. What time do I have to leave? 8:15? All right, we're good. All right, 5 minutes till I sign books, you're saying? All right, so we got 5 minutes. Let's do some Q&A.
Is it the polyphenols, the flavonoids that are in coffee, they're not the same ones necessarily that are in green tea and spices, right? They're all...
You want a wide variety of polyphenols. So coffee is the most abundant ones. It's also full of something called melanoids. And this is something fascinating. Did you guys notice my amazing tan?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a presidential tan. And my hair's not orange. So, it turns out there is a compound in our body called melanin, and that's what makes our skin tan or gives us a dark complexion. Well, inside your eyes and inside your brain, there's something called neuromelanin and ocular melanin. And doctors in their ultimate wisdom have called this junk melanin forever. It's like, why is this crap in the brain? There's like all this dark stuff, it makes no sense, it must be junk. Get rid of that. Well, it turns out some guys in Mexico, some physicians down there, spent 10 years asking why is there melanin inside the eye? And why is there more oxygen inside the eye than can be delivered by the amount of blood flow? This has been a mystery for eye doctors for a very long time. Turns out melanin has the unique power to convert water into electrons and free oxygen. So I've been intentionally exposing myself to extra sunshine, especially during winter. I have a tanning lamp that's high in ultraviolet B, which helps with your vitamin D production and vitamin D activation. And I spend time in the sun because I want more melanin, because inside the brain, it allows the brain to make more electrons and more oxygen when it really needs it. If you're an electrical guy, it acts like a capacitor in the body for energy production. So who would have thought? What's melanin made out of? Very few people know this, even biochemists. It's made out of cross-linked polyphenols. The black stuff in coffee is melanoids. It's the easiest path for your body to make melanin, which is kind of cool. And you do want to get the green tea polyphenols. You do want to get brightly colored vegetables. However, bell peppers are members of the nightshade family. Eggplants are. And it turns out sometimes the peel of a lot of vegetables, where all the polyphenols are, also has the most plant defense compounds that for some kinds of mitochondria can be absolutely disabling. You give me a nightshade family, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, bell peppers, paprika, stuff like that, with my mitochondrial makeup, it absolutely wrecks my mitochondrial function and it causes autoimmune arthritis. In fact, 25% of cases of arthritis are caused by, it turns out they're caused by those food groups or whole grains, which are also full of this compound called lectins. Lectins kill certain types of mitochondria or inhibit their function, which then drives leptin resistance, which then drives insulin resistance, which then drives high blood sugar, which drives type 2 diabetes. Who would have thought? So be careful when you get your polyphenols. Make sure you're not allergic to it and you're not getting the plant defense systems along with the polyphenols. That's why a lot of traditional cooking methods. Like, how many of you eat quinoa? How many of you pressure cook the quinoa before you eat it? You're doing it wrong. Traditionally, in Peru, when I went down there, there's a way to cook quinoa. And you take it and you soak it and you ferment it and then you cook it. And you do that because that in that species, but not in grains like gluten, it inactivates the lectins, so you can eat it without it causing damage to the lining of your gut and causing systemic inflammation. Remember, systemic inflammation equals systemic mitochondrial disabling. So if you're eating, raw quinoa or just basically cooked quinoa, you seriously need to stop it, or you need to pressure cook it. And if you go down to Peru, they'll tell you that, and they're like, silly Americans, silly Canadians. All right, another question.
What if you peel the nightshade vegetables? Does that make a difference?
If you peel a nightshade vegetable, does it make a difference? Yes and no. It depends on how sensitive you are. Traditionally in Italy, where they do tomatoes, they grow tomatoes that are easy to dip in water, boiling water, to take the skin off, and then you de-seed them. So the seeds and skin have most of them, so a lot of people can tolerate tomato sauce made that way, but we don't bother with that anymore. Throw it all in there with some frogs and bugs and grind it all up. They'll eat it. Bit of a problem. However, for most people who are sensitive to those lectins, around 25% of us probably, even that, you're not going to like how you feel. And it's weird. So I'm pretty sensitive to this. My son, he loves tomatoes. He'll eat them all day long. And I'm like, if they're raw and you get rid of the seeds, I'm good. You cook them, I feel like crap. But if he eats one bite of potato for a week, Daddy, can you rub my neck? And my entire life, I had this huge pain, like right up here, and it was always there, and it was like sometimes like a candle burn. It was really painful. I go to the chiropractor, and there's all these knots and muscles. He gets the same thing. And you know what? If I have one bowl of green chili, I grew up in New Mexico where green chili is like soul food. One bowl of that, one French fry, my mitochondria, those poisons affect them, and that's where I feel it. Muscle tension, muscle pain. My daughter can eat potatoes. It's about your mitochondrial wiring. It's totally different, but you got to know what that is. And if you don't eat any of that stuff for a little while, and you're like, whoa, check out how good I feel. And by the way, those are all the suspect foods in the Bulletproof Diet Roadmap, which you guys get for free.
How do you figure out your mitochondrial wiring?
If figured out by paying attention to what hurts. You can do some other tests and things like that, but it takes a little bit of work. But the Bulletproof Diet is a lot of that, and then Headstrong, I'm like, here's what to do to turn up energy in the cells specifically. Brain octane oil is one of the fastest and surest ways to do it. Eating more polyphenols is another way to do it. Don't eat fried stuff is another way to do it. And stop the seed oils already. Just do the opposite of whatever the American Heart Association says.
Question about the ketones. There's some products on the market that use like a salt.
Ketone salts or keto salts.
Yeah. How are those?
I interviewed a guy named Dr. Beach. He studied with Hans Krebs, who invented the Krebs cycle, and for 40 years has been one of the top researchers in mitochondrial, basically physiology, like how mitochondria actually work. One of the top experts in ketosis. Well, it turns out the companies that sell ketone salts don't like him very much, because he pointed out the unfortunate fact that when we manufacture ketone salts today, you get 50% of the ketone salts are biocompatible, and the other half are a mirror image molecule that is not biocompatible. And it goes into the body, no one has tracked where it goes, and in his research they cause mitochondrial damage. So I don't touch the stuff. I can tell you, before I did the research on this, I formulated a ketone salt that I wanted to sell as a bulletproof product. So I spent a good amount of R&D dollars doing this. When I found out the science, I'm like, I'm not selling this stuff. So I turned down millions of dollars in sales because I don't think that's something that we ought to be consuming yet. There are cases of cancer in advance where you're going to die anyway. It might be worth it. You can spike your ketones dramatically, but you're also taking a hit. So for prophylactic use, I do not recommend ketone salts today. We may have some other forms of ketones that come out later. Right now, the best way that I know of to get exogenous ketones is brain octane. And yes, I sell brain octane, so this could all be a mysterious lie that I'm telling you guys to sell more stuff. I'm just telling you, I'd make more money if I sold you ketone salts, but I won't do it.
How much a day do you recommend?
Of brain octane?
Yeah.
There's this cool thing called bowel tolerance. It widely varies. So for some people, a teaspoon at a time, they're like, my thyroid, especially women over 40 with thyroid conditions, like, there's too much energy. It's like, yeah, your thyroid just turned back on. You might need to back off on your thyroid meds. Right? Like, it's got profound effects when you turn your mitochondria on. And like for me, I'll do a couple tablespoons of my bulletproof coffee. I'm good to go. Every meal, my kids, my wife, all of us, we just pour it on our food.
I had some with sushi last night.
Yeah, on sushi, it changes your life, I swear. I don't have my thing with, I do. Let me see. I'll show you what I travel with. I'm literally like heading straight to the airport, so this is an unplanned demo. But yep, I'm going to be gone for a day and a half. Here's my brain octane. It's a little sample bottle of it, and I tested this up to 22,000 feet in one of the pieces of equipment in my labs. The one where I sit in to go to 22,000 feet, and it didn't leak in my wife's purse, so it's pretty good. But this is what I do. I literally pour it on my sushi. It doesn't matter what I'm eating. I just put a tablespoon or so, and I always have ketones, and I never have food cravings, which is so cool. And I can skip a meal, and I don't care, right? Like, oh, there's no lunch on this trip? That's irritating. And if I do it every day for a while, and I'm like giving 10 interviews in New York or something, that's a high energy day I might want to eat. But on an average day, it's like, I'll probably have lunch, but if I don't, it doesn't really matter. Or I'll have a bar or something. Like, so my ability to function at a very high level without like constantly cramming sugar or protein or something in, it really makes a difference for me. All right, how are we doing on time? Should I do one more question? One more, all right. Question right there.
Hi, intermittent fasting and specifically the bulletproof coffee in the morning on the end. I was wondering if that was recommended or safe for persons with like severe stress conditions who are bothered by caffeine and not eating a lot of food, like get shake and things like that. Would you recommend that something for somebody in that condition to do?
So you're asking if you have a severe stress condition and a problem with caffeine, should you do bulletproof coffee and intermittent fasting?
Decaf, obviously, but it's just I'm super sensitive to everything.
If you're super sensitive to everything and you have a severe stress condition, you shouldn't be doing intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting without bulletproof coffee is a form of stress. Intermittent fasting with brain octane is a lesser form of stress, but it's still a form of stress. If you are dealing with a lot of stress or you're more than about 25 pounds overweight, you actually should put some protein in the morning, and within a half hour of waking up, you should have about 30 grams of protein. So you might have a couple eggs, and the protein you should include would be collagen. I make a grass-fed collagen. You can get it downstairs, I think, right? Yeah, okay, cool. So make sure Health Canada didn't block it for some bizarre reason. They keep making up crap. Anyway, so the grass-fed collagen, We make that stuff with enzymes and things like that. And the reason you want to do collagen, it turns out high protein levels, most of the protein we get, including whey protein, I recommend not more than 2 tablespoons of that stuff. I make a high-end whey as well. But I can tell you, don't eat my whey more than 2 tablespoons a day because whey is high in some essential amino acids. But if you get too many of these amino acids, which are common in muscle meats, dairy protein, and most of the proteins we consume, they chronically elevate something called mTOR. And I write about this in Headstrong. mTOR, when you get spikes of mTOR, it causes you to grow muscles. mTOR, when it's always present, causes systemic inflammation and is linked to cancer and aging. Turns out collagen protein, which is largely missing from our diet, is high in glycine and low in these other bad proteins. So whenever you eat the other proteins, you should have some collagen present. So that's why if I have protein in the morning, I just put 3 scoops of the Bulletproof collagen powder in Bulletproof coffee, and I'm getting none of the bad proteins, but I'm getting enough protein as building blocks. So you should play with some protein. You might even want a moderate amount of the Bulletproof carbs, like the starches, even in the morning, if you're dealing with a severe stress condition and you tolerate them, because you don't need to take another hit with intermittent fasting.
The carbs such as?
Sweet potatoes are one of the best ones, and you guys are gonna like this: white rice, not brown rice. Like, throughout all of rice eating history, guess what? The people who could afford it ate the white rice, and the people who couldn't afford it ate the brown rice. And the reason they did this, and they invested so much money and time and technology to polish the parts off the rice, they didn't do it because they wanted pretty rice. They did it because they're removing the plant defense systems. The same reason that the people in Peru ferment and soak and do all this other crap to their quinoa so they can eat this stuff. Because they know that if they eat it, they get bloated, which is one of the signs you ate plant defense systems. What happens when you eat brown rice? You get bloated. Oh, and brown rice has 80 times more arsenic than white rice. So, I said one more, but I got one more one right for you back.
Any connection between mitochondria?
Sorry, talk louder.
Any connection between mitochondria and concussions or concussion recovery?
Oh, great question. So traumatic brain injury, concussions, and mitochondria, what's the connection? It turns out it's all about mitochondria. When you take a hit to the head, in fact, last year I took a knee to the side of the head at high velocity. I'm not saying where it was, except it was at Burning Man. You guys see the movie Thunderdome, Mad Max, a while back? Yeah. They actually have a Thunderdome there. Like, how could you not be, like, put on bungee cords and launch at your friend with foam bats? Anyway, my friend who showed me nameless, her knee hit the side of my head, her titanium knee. That was not good. Anyway, her knee really hurt. But what happens is you get massive swelling, and swelling comes from mitochondria, and then you get cell death. That's largely mediated by mitochondria. So what I did, knowing, I was camping with a whole bunch of health experts, and I kind of I'm like, guys, I have a traumatic brain injury, this sucks. So I took 10 Unfair Advantages, which is a supplement I make that directly supports mitochondrial energy production. I took 10 Keto Primes that has a similar effect. I took all the fish oil that anyone had in the camp, about 30 grams a day you'd want to do. I took a risk because when you hit your head, you actually shouldn't take fish oil until you know that you don't have bleeding in the brain. But anyway, I'm married to an ER doctor, I'm in the desert, and flip a coin, whatever. There's airplanes if you need it, right? And I was leaving the next day anyway. And then I did lots of hydration. I put on, funny enough, some True Dark glasses to like calm the brain down, put in noise canceling headphones. That's why people with concussions want to be in dark, quiet locations. Same thing with migraines. It's because like the mitochondria, they need to self-organize. They do not have additional exterior stuff to deal with. So I did all that stuff, and I recovered very, very quickly. Then I did some neurofeedback. But compared to the size of the impact and the duration of time that I was a little bit zombified, it was remarkable. Just knowing that supporting mitochondria can do that. So, and of course, ketosis is one of the strongest things you can do if you're like playing a professional sport where you might get hit in the head. You should be in ketosis before you go on the field. And if you do get hit in the head, you should go into ketosis as fast as humanly possible. In that case, I was already in ketosis. I used my art car is a stick of butter with a coffee cup on top that spins around that I give away Bulletproof coffee. So I had more than a little Bulletproof coffee that day. So I was already in ketosis. But I did do more brain octane, and I would say in that case, there's one where you might want to take ketone salts. Like, who cares if you're getting some non-bioidentical stuff? You got to get the ketones in real quickly, but after that, I go into normal ketosis. And so your prognosis can change dramatically, but it is all mitochondria. Long-term improvement, increase energy in the brain, techniques are all in Headstrong, and do neurofeedback, and infrared light, red light therapy on the head, you're good to go. All right, let's sign some books. Thank you very much.